Fort Worth, Texas is more than cattle drives, cowboys, and the world's largest honky-tonk saloon. It's also home to Shorty Rock.
Look at that.
Always had his cowboy boots on, his western pants, his belt, his cowboy hat, his starched shirt. He was all country. He loved everybody, and everybody loved him. He was just so cute and always had a smile on his face. He just loved the ladies. And if they could dance, you were it.
Woo! Y'all mind if I saddle up right next to the best dang dancer in this whole place?
Try and keep up, partner.
Oh, yeah? Well, how's this? Howdy. I'm Shorty.
Oh, giddy up, Shorty. Cotton.
Cotton? Well, I'm very pleased to meet you, Cotton. What brings you around here?
I've been driving 18-wheeler.
Cotton grew up she ended up settling here.
Did I tell you the story about where I grew up? It's a pretty long one.
Oh, I want to hear it.
Cotton was really drawn to the Texas lifestyle. She liked motorcycles, she liked drinking, she liked dancing, and there's no shortage of places to do that here in this area.
She, as luck would have it, had a motorcycle, and he had one too.
And it was on from there. They both really clicked. They really did. They go dancing, they go play darts and ride their motorcycles, and they loved going out camping. They just had a really good time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Cooked to perfection. Just like my present company.
Not sure my ex-husbands would agree.
Really? Well, and how many of those you got?
Let me guess how many you got.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Go ahead. Come on, let's be serious, all right? You're getting warmer, but more than that.
Shorty had been married many times. I don't know a better way to say that.
Yeah, that's it.
Not bad.
Yeah.
I got you beat.
Get out. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about this many? Wow, that's something. You do got me beat. Well, hey, here's the falling in love all over again.
And again.
They both just kind of laughed it off and said, this is the one.
Cotton fits right into Shorty's routine in every way.
Hi, darling. Ladies. All right, drum roll, please. Here she is lucky number 8.
Shorty had brought Cotton for our normal Wednesday meeting.
So, these are Shorty's angels.
Yep.
Room for one more?
Shorty always can use another angel.
Well, lucky him.
Hallelujah!
She seemed like a very sweet lady, like she really cared for Shorty. And they truly did love each other. We all liked her.
But he'd be hopeless without us, right?
We all loved her because Shorty loved her. We took her in, just like he would want us to.
They were just like young teenagers in love and bashful and, very kind to each other.
A few months later, Cotton moves in with Shorty.
When it comes to women, I don't think my dad's ever really taken the slow boat.
Thank you, Mom.
You sure I can't make you lunch?
You know I think that you're the best dang cook north of El Paso. But today's Wednesday, and Wednesday is tamale day at work.
How could I have forgotten?
I gotta go. I'm late.
Shorty was definitely a creature of habit. He went to work, to the bar, and then home, and then repeat.
Shorty's world became Cotton's world.
Howdy, cowboy.
Hi there, pretty lady.
Sure, I'm gonna miss you when I'm out on the road.
Y'all ready now for your trip?
Yeah.
Cotton was a long-haul trucker, which can be a very lonely occupation. She went from town to town, and she may not have really set down roots anywhere.
I miss your friends, too.
Well, they're all friends now.
She didn't have family in the area, and she really depended on Shorty for her lifestyle.
What's in the box?
What box? A little something to keep you company on the road.
No!
I thought we called him Harley.
He's perfect!
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You got me a dog!
I did. Isn't he cute?
Oh, he's so cute. Oh.
Shorty had got Cotton this little dog for her to take on the road with her so she wouldn't be lonely.
Come on, Harley. Oh,
He's cute, huh?
cute.
It's not uncommon for truck drivers to have pets, to bring them with them so they have that companionship.
With puppy Harley along for the ride, all that's left is to tie the knot.
Shorty and Cotton got married at the Honkytonk Women's Saloon in Azle, Texas. It was a Western wedding. They both had black hats. She had a veil on her hat and matching Western shirts and jeans.
You know, everybody has their ideal wedding. That was his and hers.
I just said, "Are you sure that she's the one this time around?" And he said, "I'm sure."
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell sensed some red flags.
Shorty and Cotton have quite a few marriages between them, and so some might look at this and say, well, maybe practice makes perfect and this time they're going to get it right, and we would hope so. But statistically speaking, that's not what we would predict.
There are some people that aren't about planning for the next 20 years. Some couples come together because they have a great time together, because they think it's an adventure and an experience. And that's kind of how I see Cotton and Shorty.
It seems like their strategy is more, well, let's just keep trying it, keep trying it, keep trying it. One of these times, things will click. But that's really not how marriage works, that it just clicks. It takes work, and it takes work beforehand to make sure that there's deep compatibility.
In October 2009, Cotton got into an accident. She actually rolled the 18-wheeler that she was driving.
I know Cotton had the dog with her when she had the truck wreck. That's when she lost the dog.
It's a devastating blow that will have a lasting impact.
Next thing you know, her insurance canceled, and I think that's when a lot of their trouble started.
Cotton and Shorty Robinson have been happily married for 19 months, but they're about to face their first challenge when Cotton totals her 18-wheeler, sadly killing her puppy and leaving her injured.
When Shorty had found out that she was in an accident, he was very upset. You know, he was concerned for his wife and what kind of condition she was in.
Okay, let's go slow. I wish you would have let me come to get you.
It's fine. I'm fine.
You're not fine. Yeah.
He immediately wanted to fly down there and get her, and she refused and basically said it was not necessary for him to come down, which kind of upset him because he wasn't for sure how badly she was hurt.
Two. Okay. There you are. All right. Get you in bed.
Cotton hurt her shoulder.
All kinds of medication.
Okay.
No, don't. Leave it. Please.
Get you covered up here.
The medication helps manage Cotton's physical pain, but that's not enough. She's not only lost her dog, but her job too, at least temporarily.
She was injured, albeit not seriously, but it resulted in some period of leave from work for disability.
Not only were finances tight, but the things that Cotton really enjoyed doing, she couldn't do anymore. She couldn't ride motorcycles. She couldn't go country dancing. And so the marriage started to deteriorate.
Hon, would you try the card one more time, please? Thank you.
Got it!
What's going on?
You tell me, Cotton. You leave the bar without even saying goodnight, and then I get this? Where's the money, Cotton? Did they cut you off?
I'm trying to sort it out.
Sort it? They fired you, didn't they?
Cotton was terminated by her employer in the spring of 2010.
He wanted to pursue why was she not getting any kind of benefits, and she just told him to drop it.
Cotton isn't exactly telling Shorty everything.
Her employer became suspicious that she was abusing the system and began investigating her claim that she remained disabled. Her employer hired a private investigator to follow Cotton around and take videos and photographs of her performing physical activities that would be much more strenuous than what would be required to drive a truck.
Who was that?
Who's what?
Car.
I don't know.
Well, Shorty had a lot of questions. I mean, she did not want him to go up there when she had this accident, and then the next thing he finds out that she doesn't have a job and they're not even giving her any benefits.
So, how's your pain today? Thought maybe we could go for a ride there.
Stop. You know I can't.
Cotton, I think we're gonna have to talk about selling your bike.
I don't think we need to do anything with my bike. Thank you very much.
We can't afford it.
Where Shorty became resentful is when he asked her repeatedly to help reduce the debt of the household. She was not willing to do that.
Okay, if you have any other solutions, please let me know. Cotton. Cotton! You know what? I'm gonna go have a drink somewhere where people actually speak to me.
It did begin to put a strain on him several months into her not working.
A major accident where a person loses a job, a beloved pet, some mobility.
After just 2 years of marriage, issues over money and jealousy are threatening to tear Shorty and Cotton Robinson apart.
Just as Shorty would spend more time with his female friends when they were experiencing discord, Cotton would do the same thing with male friends. And in this case, she began to spend more time with Rick.
I haven't seen you around. You new?
Name's Rick.
Well, Rick, I drive the welcome wagon around these parts. Let me be the first to say howdy.
Gee, I think I'm gonna like it around here.
Just like Cotton, Rick was a stranger to the area, and he took a liking to Cotton, and she the same with him.
Then, some upsetting news.
What's wrong?
And Johnny Ringo died.
Who's Johnny Ringo?
He was one of the great ones.
Johnny Ringo, he was a wonderful, gorgeous, sexy man. Happy-go-lucky, funny, Just a lot of fun to be around.
I mean, everybody loved him.
Funeral's next week. You think maybe you can come with me?
I don't even know him.
Cotton, it would really mean a lot to me if you came.
No, you go ahead.
I'm not going to ask again.
You don't have to. Because my answer won't change.
He wanted her to be there with him, by his side. She chose not to.
Shorty opened up his own personal checking account so that Cotton couldn't spend any of his money.
He was tired of bankrolling her. And so Shorty takes his money from their joint checking account and he puts it in his own.
It all came to a climax at the bar after the funeral.
I've been to the bank. You think I want to find out you cut me off? Look at me. Look at me, damn it. Look at me. Get out of my face. Listen, get off of me. You tell your little friend. He best not come home tonight.
Right when she got to the front door, she said, "Lisa, don't forget, tell your friend not to come home."
I think her exact words were, "Tell your friend not to come home because he's going to be in pieces." We call these idle threats.
Come on, Cotton. He's trying to get in the house. I don't want him to hurt me. Cotton!
She called the police department to say that she was in fear of her life, that Shorty was going to assault her.
Hey, let me in my own house. Cotton! Please come.
The sergeant and I show up on scene, and Shorty's clearly not upset, clearly not disturbed.
It's my house. She locked me out of my own goddamn house.
It's the police, ma'am. I need you to open up.
We talk to Cotton at the door. She finally says that, hey, I was scared. I thought he was going to come in here and break the door down and assault me.
I know he's drunk and he's threatening me.
At that point in time, go somewhere else if need be. Yelling and screaming through the door is just not a proper way to deal with things.
Okay, you won this round, Cotton. You won't win the next.
The writing was on the wall. It was over.
Some people just want to disappear. Some people just don't want to be found.
Shorty and Cotton Robinson's marriage is beginning to fall apart after he cuts her off financially. In response, she calls the police, saying he threatened her life.
The next day, I got a phone call, and it was Shorty.
Oh, it got ugly between us last night. Yeah, I wound up staying in a motel. Yeah, it's over. It's over between us.
He said, I went home, we argued, the law was called. There was probably more to the story than I know, but I know he had his boiling point and he was going to ask her for a divorce.
Don't worry, I got a plan. Look, I'm gonna talk to you later, okay? All right, bye.
His grand plan was that he was going to go away, and while he was gone, he was going to have the electricity and all that stuff shut off.
Shorty's intent was to kick her out of the home.
Shorty going and opening up a bank account secretly in his name only suggests to me that the rift between he and Cotton has risen to a different and more problematic level because he's gotten to a point where he doesn't trust Cotton. And when the trust goes, usually so goes the marriage.
The fact that he does not seem to be able to sit down and have a real conversation with her and end the marriage, considering he has a great track record for ending marriages, is a red flag to me. He's now going to secretly turn the lights off so that the darkness drives her away. It just makes me wonder if he's afraid of her. or afraid of conflict.
Shorty's going about this in a pretty cowardly way.
But Shorty isn't going to let fear stand in his way.
Mike, you got a sec? I'd like to take Monday, Tuesday off. I got a lot of stuff going on right now. I just need to take a long drive and clear my head.
He showed up for work every day. He didn't call in sick. He didn't go on vacations.
That was something his employer said, was this the most dependable employee I've ever had.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
The last day that Shorty went into work was that Friday, May 28th.
The next day, Shorty's plan is set in motion.
He was tired of sleeping in the recliner, and I think that he just wanted to sleep on something more comfortable.
What the hell is that?
It's a mattress. I'm gonna sleep on it tonight. And tomorrow I'm gonna take it on my ride with me. And on Tuesday, when I come back, I want you gone.
The same day that Shorty had bought the air mattress at the store, his intent was to tell Cotton to leave the house, to gather her things and be gone.
And so he went on his vacation. We didn't think anything of it because he was supposed to be gone.
But Shorty's vacation seems to take an unexpected turn.
Cotton was at the Honkytonk. She started uncontrollably bawling. I mean, just bawling. And I said, Cotton, did something really bad go wrong? I said, it's okay. Just, something bad happened.
He left me. He said he was going on a ride. And then all of a sudden he's getting in a white truck with some woman. I don't think he's coming back.
Cotton said that he had run off with a woman in a white Chevy truck.
What's going on?
Shorty left me. It was an Hispanic woman. Maybe she was that Tamale lady.
If Shorty had a girlfriend, we'd know about it, Cotton.
Shorty doesn't return to work as planned either.
He doesn't pick up his last paycheck. He doesn't come to gather up his tools. He had a 401k there, so days turns into weeks, and 2 weeks go by, and the boss doesn't hear from Shorty at all. There's something really wrong.
That's when his employer became very concerned that something was amiss.
Shorty's gone for 2 long weeks before a missing persons report is filed.
Well, they met each other at work, and they'd see each other every Wednesday.
Don't you think it's a little weird that he just leave without his tools?
Well, as you know, we weren't getting along very well. Guess he wanted to get away from me as quickly as possible. With her.
Hey there, Maria.
She was adamant that he got into a white truck and drove off into the sunset and was never heard of again. So we have 2 conflicting stories. We've got the friend saying he's missing, and we have Cotton saying he ran away with a woman, and me trying to find out what exactly happened.
The last confirmed sighting of Shorty is on Saturday, May 29th.
Shorty was seen on camera at a local store purchasing an air mattress and a box of donuts and then heading back towards Pelican Bay.
That's the day before Cotton says he left with the woman in the white truck. Perhaps investigators have been focused on the wrong lead.
His boss said no one comes up to work to deliver tamales.
If Shorty had another girlfriend, I'm pretty sure the rest of us would have known about it.
Then there are Shorty's phone records. His cell hasn't pinged off any towers outside the vicinity. 2 months later, Police are shocked when they execute a search warrant on Shorty's place.
Detective?
He was wearing my dad's clothes and my dad's cowboy hat.
Cotton and her new boyfriend Rick have made Shorty's house their home.
What's this?
We have a warrant, ma'am.
I mean, that was pretty quick for them to have a relationship instead of her being concerned about where her husband was.
Detective Tobar placed an assist call to the North Richland Hills Police Department, who sent 2 crime scene officers to the home to execute the search warrant. When the crime scene officers were about to begin their search, one of them noticed that there was a pile of brush that was over and it appeared to be masking a small mound of disturbed dirt.
But Chief, I'm telling you, we should be looking on the property, not just inside. There is this pile of dirt. Yes, Chief.
The police chief explained that Cotton had said that she had a dog that had died, and that was where she buried the dog. And the police chief instructed the crime scene officers that they were there to execute the search warrant in the home and not to dig up dead dogs.
In the end, every lead, everything that they chased down, nothing was the break that they needed. There was still no Shorty.
At the end of the summer 2010, the case went cold.
Until a new ranger comes to town.
I take my hat off to Texas Ranger Claire Barnes.
A good homicide investigator has a hunch.
All eyes are on Cotton Robinson when her husband Shorty goes missing. She claims he left her for another woman.
You always held that hope that maybe he is, drinking a pina colada down there in Mexico, enjoying the good life.
But 3 years have passed, and Shorty's friends and family find it difficult to keep their hopes alive. Until a new field office for the Texas Rangers opens nearby.
3 years after Shorty's disappearance, a ranger named Claire Barnes picks up the case and he runs with it.
One of the things that Claire did was call Pelican Bay, and Claire spoke with the current chief, who tells Claire that everyone in the area suspects that Cotton had killed her husband, but no one can prove it.
Claire Barnes next contacts Detective Anthony Tobar, who's moved on from Pelican Bay to a new agency.
He's like, I'm gonna go talk to her. I'm gonna tell her I found something new. I was like, did you find something new? No, not at all. I'm just gonna go pull on some strings and see what happens.
He made arrangements to take some time off, is what I thought.
Okay.
And he took off.
You got in that truck?
He got in the truck.
So tell me, Cotton, what color was the truck again that Shorty left in?
It was white. It belonged to a Hispanic woman.
So Ranger Barnes re-interviews Cotton, and she gives him the same story that she's been telling everybody for the past 3 years.
Give me the license plate number to that truck and I'll have this wrapped up by tomorrow afternoon.
I wished I could.
After about 2 hours, Claire got up from his seat, asked Cotton if she wanted a soda. She said yes. He went to his office and got a cardboard box, loaded up the box with random materials, folders, papers, just meaningless items, and went back into the room and set the box on the table.
They took all of that out of the house?
No, this is evidence and other things. Listen, Cotton.
He then said to her, Cotton, for 2 hours, you've given me the same story that you've given everyone else for 3 years, but we both know that that story is not true.
What happened to him in there?
Nothing. He left.
He left.
Yeah.
God, that's not true. Honey, I don't.
Nothing happened.
We know you did it. Everything's in here.
He said, this box of evidence I'm taking to the grand jury, and it's not going to be good for you. So why don't you tell me what really happened?
It was readily apparent that she knew that the jig was up, and she took the bait. She changed her story.
He came home one night, drunk.
What she described was a drunk and angry Shorty returning home in late May of 2010.
Of course, she's still up. This is my life now. This is my life. Because of you.
And he was pissed off about money and about us. And I was cutting up some fruit. And he blamed me for everything. And then he came at me. He acted like a crazy man.
You turn around and look at me when I'm talking to you, woman.
He surprised the crap out of me. And I turned and I cut him. In the arm. It was just the arm. I'm sorry.
Stay away from me!
You okay? And I wanted to help, but he brushed me off.
Stay away from me!
Hey, Shorty. Shorty, wake up. Shorty. 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 And the next morning, I found him there, dead. I guess I panicked, so I buried him.
She took the twin-size air mattress, cut it open down the middle, put his body inside, and then closed it over itself, drug him out the front door, and put him in the ground.
The story doesn't seem to add up.
What? I just told you. That's what happened.
There was no indication in Shorty's past that he was a violent man, especially towards women. He actually loved women.
Unequivocally, there was no evidence that Shorty had ever been violent with her.
But part of the story is definitely true.
Claire was able to procure a search warrant for the recovery of the remains.
Shorty was found 15 feet from his own front door and in 15.5 inches in the ground.
What was particularly poignant to me in that image of him walking out of the store with the air mattress is that we later found out that he had in fact purchased his own coffin.
This case could have been solved years earlier.
They dismissed that small gravesite because it was inconsistent with the size of a human being.
Cotton's lies continue to come undone.
He was strangled. So, although there may be some truth to her story, it wasn't the truth.
Cotton was placed under arrest for murder.
Detectives interview Rick once again.
There in the bar, and
okay, here's also the deal.
She'll say it in like a sarcastic manner. Oh, I'm a murderer. Yeah, I killed him.
He told Claire that at one point Cotton had admitted to him that she had strangled Shorty.
Something had to have been the final drive. It could have been an argument. It could have been something he said as he's like, I'm going, I'm leaving. And she waits till he goes to sleep.
think it'd be easy to look at what happened to Shorty and say she murdered Shorty to be able to inherit from him and not get divorced. And I think there's probably truth in that. But I think also it's highly likely that Cotton felt indignant about the fact that Shorty was thinking he was going to outsmart her.
Oftentimes, sociopathy will lay dormant if a person is getting what they want. And so she thought to herself in that moment, I'm not getting what I want. How do I go and get what I want? Well, if I kill Shorty, I will get his house and his money, and then I can go be with the person that I want to be with.
And so I think in this case, when it became clear to Cotton that he thinks I'm just going to walk out and go my way. No, I'm not. I'll show him. And I think she showed him.
Neola Cotton Robinson pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 18 years in jail for killing Irvin Shorty Robinson.
A good homicide investigator has a hunch, and Detective Tobar should be given credit for that. And Claire Barnes from the Texas Rangers should be given credit for getting it over the hill.
Shorty will never be forgotten.
Shorty was cremated, and they put the urn in the Honkytonk Women's Saloon, which was his very favorite place to go. And so he's actually there with us.
For me, it was just, emotional relief. It's like finally it's solved. I get to put my dad in his final resting place.
I think he's watching us anyway. But Shorty, you did not die in vain, and we all loved you. We still love you. And maybe you went through a last couple of days, but you are in God's hands now. And your story is not going to die.
The year is 1975. The location, Palo Alto, California. The sun is dipping below the rolling hills of the Stanford foothills, casting long, skeletal shadows across the landscape. It is a time of transition, an era where the optimism of the 60s has curdled into something darker, more uncertain. A 21-year-old woman named Leslie Perlov, a graduate of Stanford University, parks her orange Chevrolet Nova. She is looking for a moment of quiet, a breath of fresh air before the evening sets in. She steps out of the vehicle, the door clicking shut with a finality she cannot possibly comprehend. She walks into the hills. She never walks out. This is not just a disappearance. It is the birth of a nightmare that will haunt Northern California for nearly half a century. A cold case, a frozen life, a killer who vanished into the golden haze of the California dream, leaving behind nothing but a trail of questions and a community paralyzed by fear. The search began with a chilling silence. When Leslie didn't return for dinner, the atmosphere shifted from casual concern to a cold, creeping dread. Her brother, Craig, found the car first. It sat there, an abandoned orange Sentinel on the edge of the dirt path, untouched, locked, holding her purse and her identification like a tomb. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, just the vast, indifferent silence of the hills. The police arrived as the fog began to roll in, their flashlights cutting weak, yellow holes into the gathering dark. They called her name into the canyons, but the only response was the rustle of the dry grass and the distant hum of the freeway. The community held its breath. In 1975, Palo Alto was a place of intellectual ambition and suburban safety, a bubble that was about to be burst by a singular, violent act. 3 days later, the bubble didn't just burst, it shattered. Search dogs led investigators to a shallow grave beneath an oak tree, barely a mile from where her car had been found. Leslie Perlov was no longer a missing person. She was a victim. The details were a gut punch to the local psyche. She had been strangled. There were signs of a struggle that the initial search had missed. She was bound. The brutality of the act suggested something more than a random encounter. It suggested a predator who had watched, waited, and struck with a terrifying efficiency. The headlines the next morning were a cacophony of horror. Co-ed found dead, strangler at large, terror in the hills. The investigation was launched into a frenzy, a desperate race against a clock that was already winding down. Detectives combed every inch of that hillside. They collected floral patterns, dirt samples, and most crucially, a scrap of fabric that didn't belong to Leslie. It was a fragment of the killer, a microscopic piece of a puzzle they wouldn't be able to solve for 43 years. The crime scene was a masterclass in forensic frustration. In 1975, DNA was a concept relegated to the back of biology textbooks, not a tool for justice. Fingerprints were the gold standard, but the killer had been careful, or lucky. No prints were found on the car. No prints were found on the body. The leads were as thin as the mountain air. Witnesses came forward with fragmented memories. A man seen loitering near the trailhead, a dark-colored sedan speeding away from the area, a strange figure in a denim jacket. But in a decade defined by hitchhikers and drifters, these were ghosts. Every lead turned into a dead end. Every suspect had an alibi that held just enough water to keep them out of handcuffs. The detectives were working in the dark, using 19th century techniques to catch a 20th century monster. The case file grew thicker, filled with black and white photos of a life cut short and the typed testimonies of people who knew nothing. As the weeks turned into months, the urgency began to decay into a dull, persistent ache. The Stewardess Strangler and the Zodiac were names that still whispered through the California breeze, and the public began to wonder if Leslie Perloff was just another entry in a growing catalog of unsolved atrocities. The police department faced a wall of silence. The physical evidence, the clothing, the ligatures, the biological samples, were placed into brown paper bags, labeled with a case number and filed away in a climate-controlled room. They were relics of a failure. The investigators moved on to other murders, other tragedies, but the Perloff family remained trapped in 1975. For them, time didn't heal. It just stretched the agony thinner and thinner until it was a transparent film over their entire lives. The hills where Leslie died remained a place of beauty for some, but for those who remembered, they were a monument to an unpunished sin. Decades passed. The 70s bled into the neon 80s, the digital 90s, and the turn of the millennium. The orange Chevrolet Nova was long gone, scrapped and forgotten. The detectives who first walked the crime scene retired, took their secrets to the grave, or spent their golden years staring at the ceiling, wondering about the one that got away. The Perloff case became a cold case, in the truest sense, a block of ice in the basement of a sheriff's office. But science was moving in the shadows. While the world obsessed over the internet and smartphones, forensic biologists were learning how to speak the language of the dead. They were learning how to extract a profile from a single skin cell, a dry drop of fluid, a hair root. The scrap of fabric from 1975 was still there, waiting in its paper bag, holding a secret that was decades ahead of its time. In 2018, the silence finally broke. It wasn't a new witness or a deathbed confession. It was a cold case unit with a new toy, genetic genealogy. This was the same technology that had recently unmasked the Golden State Killer, and now it was being turned toward the hills of Palo Alto. Investigators took the biological samples from Leslie's clothing, samples that had been preserved for 43 years, and uploaded the DNA profile to public databases. They weren't looking for the killer directly. They were looking for his cousins, his aunts, his distant relatives. They were building a family tree out of the ether. The search narrowed. The branches of the tree began to converge on a single name. A name that had never appeared in the original 1975 case file. A man who had lived a full life while Leslie's had been frozen in time. The name was John Arthur Getrew. In 1975, he was a young man living in the area, a man who had already tasted the darkness. As investigators dug into his past, the horror only deepened. Getrew wasn't just a random killer. He was a predator with a history that spanned continents. He had been convicted of a similar crime in Germany years prior, yet he had somehow slipped through the cracks of the American legal system, returning to California to strike again. He had been hiding in plain sight for nearly half a century, living in the suburbs, perhaps even walking the same streets as the people who still mourned Leslie Perloff. The revelation was a lightning bolt. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, wasn't a physical object, but a genetic code that bridged the gap between the disco era and the age of information. The arrest was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the violence of the crime. In November 2018, police converged on Getru's home. He was an old man now, a grandfather, a person the neighbors described as quiet and unassuming. But when the handcuffs clicked, the weight of 1975 finally landed on his shoulders. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a relic. Yet the DNA didn't lie. It was a 1 in a billion match. The cold case wasn't just warming up, it was boiling over. The legal proceedings that followed were a grueling march through the past, forcing a new generation to look at the grainy photos of the Stamford Hills and the face of a 21-year-old girl who never got to grow old. The justice was delayed, but it was coming with the force of a tidal wave. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. The Perloff family, now gray-haired and weathered by decades of grief, sat across from the man who had stolen their sister, their daughter, their peace. Getru's defense tried to argue against the validity of the decades-old evidence, but the science was insurmountable. The trial wasn't just about a murder, it was a trial of time itself. It was a demonstration that the past is never truly dead, and that secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury them. When the verdict was read, guilty, there were no cheers. There was only a heavy, collective exhale. The ghost of the hills had finally been given a name, a face, and a prison cell. The legacy of the 1975 Palo Alto cold case is one of both tragedy and triumph. It stands as a testament to the persistence of investigators who refused to let a file stay closed, and to the power of technology to right the wrongs of the past. But the Chandong shock remains. It reminds us that among us walk people with shadows in their hearts, men who can commit the unthinkable and then go on to buy groceries, mow their lawns, and live for 40 years as if nothing happened. Leslie Perlov's story ended in a shallow grave, but her name now serves as a beacon for every other cold case waiting for its turn in the light. The hills are quiet now. The orange nova is a memory. But the truth? The truth is finally, painfully home. The echo of the courtroom gavel didn't just signal a verdict. It reopened a portal into a dark, interconnected labyrinth of California's past. As the shadow of John Arthur Getru moved from the sunlight of his quiet suburban life into the sterile corridors of a maximum security prison, the investigators' focus didn't soften, it intensified. If a man could kill in the hills of Palo Alto and vanish for 43 years, what else had he done? The 1975 cold case was no longer a single, isolated tragedy. It was the loose thread that, when pulled, began to unravel a tapestry of terror stretching across the San Francisco peninsula. This wasn't just about Leslie Perlov anymore. This was about a predator who had treated the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Stanford campus as his personal hunting grounds, a man who had mastered the art of being invisible while standing in the center of the frame. The air in the cold case unit grew thick with the scent of old paper and the hum of high-speed scanners. Detectives began a grim timeline mapping, a forensic reconstruction of Getru's every movement during the 1970s. They looked for patterns, similar ligatures, specific knots, the choice of remote trailheads, the signature of a killer who used the rugged terrain as both an accomplice and a shroud. The name Janet Taylor began to circulate through the office like a ghost. In 1974, just months before Leslie Perlov's Orange Nova was found abandoned, another 21-year-old had vanished. Janet, the daughter of a legendary Stanford athletic director, had been hitchhiking, a common, innocent practice of the era that had become a fatal gamble. Her body was found tossed like refuse down a steep embankment off Sand Hill Road. The similarities were more than haunting, they were a mirror image. The connection between the cases felt visceral, but in the world of high-stakes prosecution, feelings are not evidence. The team had to go back to the source. They returned to the evidence lockers, searching for the biological ghosts of Janet Taylor. They found a pair of trousers, kept in a box for nearly half a century. Using the same revolutionary DNA extraction techniques that broke the Perlov case, they searched for a microscopic trace of the man who had discarded her life. The tension in the lab was a physical weight. If the DNA matched, they weren't just looking at a murderer. They were looking at a serial killer who had operated under the nose of the world's most prestigious university. The results came back with the chilling precision of a lightning strike. A match. John Arthur Gettru was the common denominator in a series of deaths that had once been blamed on the Stanford murders mythos. The revelation sent a shockwave through the community. For decades, the Stanford murders of the early 70s, a string of brutal killings involving young women connected to the university, had been a source of local legend and paralyzing fear. Names like Arliss Perry, murdered inside the university chapel, and others like Victoria Shermer had created an atmosphere of occult-like dread. Now, the mask was being ripped off. Gettru wasn't a cult leader or a phantom. He was a man who had been employed at Stanford, a man who had a job, a social circle, and a disturbing level of access to the very victims he sought. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, wasn't just DNA. It was the realization that the monster had been part of the faculty's periphery, a wolf in the fold who understood the geography of the campus better than the police did. As the investigation pushed further back into the 1960s, the scope of Gettru's depravity crossed oceans. Detectives discovered a cold case from 1963 in West Germany. A 15-year-old girl, the daughter of a U.S. Army sergeant, had been raped and strangled. The killer in that case? A teenage John Arthur Gettru. He had been convicted, served a brief stint in a juvenile facility, and was then essentially exported back to the United States. He hadn't been rehabilitated. He had been relocated. The system had failed spectacularly, allowing a known predator to reset his life in California, where he could blend into the burgeoning tech culture and the academic elite of the Bay Area. The documents from Germany, yellowed and brittle, read like a blueprint for the murders that would follow a decade later. It was a cycle of violence that the authorities had unknowingly facilitated. The public's reaction was a mix of relief and profound fury. How had a convicted strangler been allowed to work in proximity to young students? How had he remained off the radar during the initial 1975 investigation? The answer lay in the silos of information that defined pre-digital law enforcement. In 1975, the Palo Alto police didn't have a direct line to German criminal records or military police files. They were looking for a local deviant, not a world-traveling sociopath with a hidden history. Gettru had used this lack of communication as a shield. He lived a double life that would make a novelist blush, acting the part of the respectable citizen by day, while the nights belonged to the darkness of the foothills. He was the cold case that walked, talked, and aged among his neighbors, a living monument to the fallibility of human memory and the limitations of 20th century policing. The 2018 arrest had triggered a race against time. Gettru was in his late 70s, his health failing. The prosecution knew that if they didn't move fast, the ultimate justice, a trial and a public accounting, would be snatched away by nature. They began to piece together his life in the 80s and 90s, wondering if the killings had truly stopped or if he had simply become even better at hiding the bodies. They looked into missing person reports from the Central Valley, from the coast, from every place Gettru had ever lived. Each file was a potential victim, each name a potential life stolen. The SOC Tsong-dong, community shock, wasn't just about the past. It was a realization that there might be a hidden map of victims that the world had yet to discover. The courtroom for the Taylor trial became a theater of the macabre. The evidence was presented with surgical precision. The DNA, the location of the body, the specific overkill nature of the strangulation. Gettru sat there, a withered version of the man who had once prowled the Stanford hills, his eyes often closed, seemingly indifferent to the catalog of horror being read aloud. But the families of the victims weren't indifferent. They were there, row after row, a collective of grief that had waited 44 years for this moment. For them, the trial wasn't just about a conviction, it was an exorcism. They were finally naming the demon that had haunted their dreams since the Ford administration. As the legal battle intensified, the narrative shifted toward the concept of forensic genealogy as a weapon. This wasn't just about one man. It was about the thousands of other John Gettrus still out there, men who believed they had gotten away with it, men who thought the cold in cold case meant dead. The Perlov and Taylor cases became the gold standard for how to use 21st century science to solve 20th century crimes. The detectives were no longer just looking at fingerprints, they were looking at the very building blocks of life. They were hunting through the family trees of total strangers to find the one branch that led to a killer. The Manhoy clue was now in everyone's blood, and the world was becoming a much smaller place for those with secrets. Yet, even with the conviction, a sense of stalemate lingered. While the Perlov and Taylor families found their version of closure, the broader Stanford murders mystery remained a jagged, bleeding wound. Other names, Arliss Perry, Kelly, and Quinn, remained unlinked to Gertrude, their killers still nameless shadows in the archives. Was Gertrude responsible for more, or was he just one of several predators who had found the liberal, open atmosphere of 1970s California to be an ideal hunting ground? The investigation into Gertrude's life became a gateway into a dark era of California history, a time when the sun-drenched promise of the West Coast was shadowed by a terrifying rise in serial violence that law enforcement was utterly unprepared to handle. The final days of the legal proceedings were marked by a heavy, atmospheric silence. The aftermath of the case wasn't a feeling of victory, but one of exhaustion. Justice had arrived, but it was late, staggeringly late. It had arrived in a wheelchair, carrying an oxygen tank, 40 years after the vibrant lives of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor had been extinguished. The on obsession shifted from who did it to how many more? As Gertrude was led away to spend his remaining days behind bars, the hills of Palo Alto seemed to hold their breath. The sun still sets over the ridges, the shadows still stretch across the trails, but now there is a name whispered in the wind. A name that serves as a warning. The past is never forgotten. It is merely waiting for the science to catch up. The gavel's final strike against the wood did more than just seal a prison cell. It acted as a frequency tuner, pulling the static-filled signals of the mid-1970s into sharp, terrifying focus. To understand the gravity of John Arthur Gertrude's conviction, one must step back into the humidity of a California summer in the 70s, a time when the summer of love had decayed into a winter of predatory cynicism. The hills surrounding Stanford University were more than just a scenic backdrop. They were a labyrinth of shadows where the rules of civilization seemed to thin out. This was an era of hitchhiking, of unlocked doors, and a profound, perhaps naive, trust in the sanctity of the academic community. But while the students were debating philosophy and politics, a different kind of student was walking among them, a student of human vulnerability. John Arthur Gertrude didn't just stumble upon his victims. He inhabited their world, a wolf wearing the invisible cloak of the mundane. He was a man who understood that the best way to hide a monster is to wrap it in the skin of a neighbor, a coworker, or a passing stranger with a helpful smile. The investigation into Gertrude's lost decades reveals a chilling portrait of the ordinary psychopath. Between the murder of Leslie Perlov in 1975 and his eventual capture in 2018, Gertrude didn't vanish into the underworld. He didn't live in a shack in the woods or leave a trail of blood across state lines that the FBI could easily track. Instead, he lived a life of staggering normalcy. He worked, he married, he became a father and a grandfather. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was a person who contributed to his community, a man who would pass you the salt at a diner or offer a nod of recognition at the local hardware store. This is the SOC Tsongdong, community shock, that cuts deeper than the crimes themselves. The realization that for 43 years, a man with the breath of a strangler was breathing the same air as the children of his victim's generation. He was a biological ticking time bomb that had already detonated, yet continued to sit on the shelf, looking perfectly intact. How does a man live with the memory of the light fading from a young woman's eyes while he tucks his own children into bed? This is the central mystery that no DNA test can ever truly solve. The forensic journey to bridge that gap between the 1975 crime scene and the 2018 arrest was a marathon run through a shifting landscape of technology. In the immediate aftermath of Leslie Perlov's death, the evidence was stagnant. The Manhoy clue was there, a microscopic signature left on the fabric of her clothing, but the world was deaf to its language. For decades, that piece of evidence sat in a temperature-controlled locker, a silent witness waiting for the human race to invent the tools required to hear its testimony. When the breakthrough finally came, it wasn't a sudden, eureka moment in a lab. It was a slow, agonizing grind through the archives of human ancestry. Genetic genealogy didn't just provide a name. It provided a map of a family's history, tracing the lineage of a killer back through generations of unsuspecting relatives. The investigators were no longer just detectives. They were time travelers, navigating the branches of a family tree to find the one rotten limb that had snapped in the hills of Palo Alto. The physical geography of Gertrude's crimes is a crucial piece of the cold case puzzle. The Santa Cruz Mountains and the Stanford foothills are beautiful, rugged terrains, but in the 70s, they were also isolated. There were no cell phones to call for help, no GPS to track a movement, and very few security cameras to capture a license plate. A killer who knew the trails, who knew where the patrol cars didn't go and where the sound of a struggle would be swallowed by the wind, held all the cards. Gertrude was a predator of opportunity, but he was also a predator of place. He chose locations that felt safe to his victims, near the university, near popular hiking trails, and turned that sense of safety into a weapon. He understood that the psychological shock of being attacked in a safe place paralyzes the victim, providing the few seconds of advantage a strangler needs to exert total control. The Matt Titchbian, mysterious disappearance of Leslie Perlov was a masterclass in this predatory exploitation of geography and trust. As the 2018 investigation deepened, the sheer scale of the missed opportunities from the 1970s began to haunt the current team. Why wasn't Gertrude a suspect then? He was there. He had a record in Germany that, while juvenile, was for an identical, horrific crime. But in 1975, there was no centralized database, no red notice, that would have popped up on a deputy's computer screen during a routine stop. The information was siloed in paper files across an ocean. The BTAC, stalemate, of the original investigation wasn't due to a lack of effort, it was due to a lack of connectivity. The world was a collection of islands, and John Arthur Gertrude was a man who knew how to swim between them. He lived in the gaps between jurisdictions, in the margins of the law, and in the blind spots of a society that couldn't imagine a teenager from a military family being a cold-blooded killer. The atmosphere of the courtroom during the final sentencing was one of heavy, stagnant air, as if the weight of 43 years was physically pressing down on the participants. When the prosecution displayed the photos of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor, vibrant, smiling women with their whole lives ahead of them, next to the image of the elderly, slumped man in the defendant's chair, the contrast was a physical blow to the spectators. This is the aftermath of a cold case solved, the realization that even though justice has been served, it is a hollow victory. There is no restoring the decades of life that were stolen. There is no bringing back the 1970s versions of these women to see the world they helped shape. There is only the cold comfort of a name on a sentencing document and the knowledge that the man will never walk the hills of California as a free man again. The obsession doesn't end with a verdict. It merely changes shape, shifting from a search for a killer to a mourning of what could have been. But the story doesn't stop with Gertrude's incarceration. The California 1975 cold case solved headline became a catalyst for a broader movement within law enforcement. It proved that no case is truly dead as long as there is physical evidence. It turned this scrap of fabric into a holy relic of the forensic age. Across the country, other cold case units began looking at their own unsolvable files with new eyes. They began to wonder if their Zodiacs, their original Night Stalkers, and their unidentified stranglers were also hiding in the suburbs, disguised as grandfathers and quiet neighbors. Gertrude's capture was the shock that the system needed, a reminder that the passage of time is not an escape, but a countdown. The Manhoy KY law of DNA had turned the entire population into a potential witness pool, and the shadows where men like Gertrude once hid were being illuminated by the glow of 1 billion genetic markers. The ripple effect of this case reached into the very heart of the Palo Alto and Stanford communities. For 40 years, A dark cloud had hung over the hills, a feeling that the ground was somehow tainted by an unpunished evil. Parents warned their children about the trails. Women hiked in groups, never alone, and a sense of watchfulness became part of the local DNA. When the news broke that the killer had been caught, it was as if a long-held breath had finally been released. But the release was accompanied by a new kind of fear, the fear of the neighbor. If John Arthur Gettru could be a killer, then who else? The BN mystery of his identity was solved, but the mystery of human nature remained as dark as ever. The community had to reckon with the fact that they had shared their space with a monster for nearly half a century, and that their safety had been an illusion maintained by the killer's own choice to remain dormant. The narrative of John Arthur Gettru is a grim reminder that the golden age of serial killers was also the golden age of investigative limitations. He was a product of a time when you could move to a new town and reinvent yourself with nothing more than a new haircut and a different story. But he lived long enough to see that world die. He lived long enough to see the arrival of a world where your past is written in your blood and where the secrets you buried in a shallow grave in 1975 can be dug up by a computer algorithm in 2018. The cold case wasn't solved by a lucky break or a sudden confession. It was solved by the relentless march of human ingenuity. It was solved because a group of people refused to let the fire of justice go out, even when it was nothing more than a tiny, flickering ember in a basement evidence room. As the sun sets over the Stamford Hills today, the shadows are still there, but they feel different. They are no longer the hiding places of a nameless phantom. They are just shadows. The name John Arthur Gettru is now synonymous with the end of an era, the era of the getaway. His conviction sent a message to every other predator still walking the streets. The clock is ticking. Your relatives are taking DNA tests. Your victim's clothing is being re-examined. The manhoy you left behind decades ago is being translated into a warrant for your arrest. The Perlov and Taylor cases are not just historical footnotes. They are the opening chapters in a new book of American justice, one where the cold never stays cold forever. Would you like me to delve deeper into the specific genealogical techniques used to track Gettru's family tree, or focus on the impact this case had on the families of the victims in the years following the trial? The conviction of John Arthur Gettru didn't just close a chapter. It tore the entire book open, exposing the jagged, unfinished edges of a decade defined by a terrifying synthesis of freedom and lethality. To look at the 1970s in California is to look at a landscape where the highway was a gateway to both reinvention and disappearance. When Leslie Perlov pulled her orange Chevrolet Nova to the side of that dirt road in 1975, she was participating in a culture of trust that was already being systematically dismantled by predators who understood the cracks in the system. The cold case phenomenon isn't just about a lack of evidence. It's about a lapse in time where the monster is allowed to age, to soften in appearance, and to integrate into the very society he once terrorized. John Gettru became a master of this camouflage. He wasn't a drifter hiding in the underbrush. He was a man who understood that the best place to hide a dark secret is behind the white picket fence of a suburban life. He became the quiet neighbor, the hardworking employee, the devoted family man, roles he played with a chilling, sociopathic precision for 43 years while the memory of Leslie Perlov remained frozen at 21. The investigators who picked up the trail in 2018 were fighting a war against the decay of memory and the literal degradation of physical matter. In a cold case of this magnitude, the Manhoy KY law, strange clue, isn't just a fingerprint. It's the integrity of a DNA strand that has survived 4 decades of storage. Think about the environment of an evidence locker, the shifting temperatures, the humidity, the simple passage of time that eats away at biological material. The fact that the sample from 1975 remained viable is a miracle of forensic preservation. It was a microscopic message in a bottle, tossed into the sea of time by detectives who didn't even know if it would ever be read. When the genetic genealogists finally uncorked that bottle, they didn't just find a name. They found a ghost that had been haunting the archives of 2 continents. They found a man who had already been solved once in Germany in 1963, only to be released back into a world that had no way of tracking his hunger for violence. The tragedy of the California 1975 cold case is amplified by the realization that Gertrude was a known quantity to the universe, if not to the Palo Alto police. The failure of information sharing between the military, international authorities, and local law enforcement in the 70s created a blind spot large enough for a killer to drive a truck through. While the Stanford community was reeling from the Stanford murders, a series of killings that felt like the work of a phantom, the phantom was actually a man with a documented history of strangulation. This is the SOC Tsongdong community shock that lingers long after the sentencing, the knowledge that the tools to stop him existed, but they were never connected. Gertrude lived his life in the gaps between these disconnected systems, moving from a teenage killer in Europe to a predatory adult in the hills of California, all while the paper trail of his crimes sat gathering dust in a basement half a world away. He was a product of a pre-digital era where a man could simply outrun his own shadow. As the 2018 investigation pivoted from DNA to digital footprints, the Manhoy clue shifted toward Gertrude's social and professional history. How does a man with his background secure employment in proximity to a university campus? How does he maintain a marriage? How does he look his children in the eye? The psychological profile of Gertrude suggests a man who could compartmentalize his depravity with terrifying ease. He wasn't a man struggling with an internal demon. He was a man who had invited the demon to dinner and given it a seat at the table. This ability to blend in is what makes the cold case so haunting. It suggests that the people we think we know, the person who coaches the local sports team, the person who sits next to us at church, could be carrying a weight of violence that we cannot fathom. Gertrude wasn't just a killer of individuals. He was a killer of communal trust, a man whose eventual capture forced an entire region to look at their neighbors with a new, cynical suspicion. The stalemate of the original 1975 investigation was a reflection of the era's limitations. Detectives back then were looking for motives, robbery, jilted lovers, visible signs of insanity. But Gertrude's motive was the act itself. It was the exertion of absolute power over another human being in a place of perceived safety. When there is no clear link between the victim and the killer, the case turns cold, almost instantly. In 1975, without a witness or a confession, the police were essentially trying to find a specific grain of sand on a beach. It was only when the Manhoy became genetic that the beach was stripped away, leaving the killer standing alone in the light. The science of 2018 didn't just solve a murder. It retroactively corrected the failures of 1975, proving that the truth is an immutable force that eventually finds its way to the surface, regardless of how many decades of silence are piled on top of it. The courtroom drama of the Taylor and Perloff trials served as a final, public accounting of this lost time. When the prosecution laid out the timeline, showing Gertrude's life milestones alongside the silence of his victims' graves, the aftermath was a sense of profound injustice. He got to experience the 80s, the 90s, and the turn of the millennium. He got to see the birth of his grandchildren. He got to experience the warmth of the sun and the comfort of a bed for 44 years that were stolen from Leslie and Janet. This is the obsession of the cold case, the realization that even a solved case is a victory for the killer in terms of time lived. Justice in 2018 is a vital, necessary act, but it is an act of salvage, not restoration. It is the picking up of pieces from a shattered mirror, trying to reconstruct a face that has been missing for nearly half a century. The impact on the families of the victims is a narrative of endurance that defies description. To live for 43 years with a hole in the family, a question mark that never goes away, is a form of psychological torture. For the Perloffs and the Taylors, the news of the arrest wasn't a moment of celebration. It was a moment of profound, heavy SOC shock. It was the sudden, violent reopening of a wound that had barely managed to form a thin layer of scar tissue. They had to reconcile the image of the young man from the 1975 sketches with the elderly man in the wheelchair. They had to listen to the clinical details of their loved one's final moments, translated into the sterile language of forensic evidence. The California 1975 cold case solved wasn't just a headline for them. It was the end of a 40-year sentence of their own, a release from the purgatory of not knowing. But the story of John Arthur Gettru is also a story about the future of the past. His conviction was one of the first major dominoes to fall in the era of investigative genetic genealogy, a tool that has since been used to identify hundreds of previously unsolvable suspects. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, that broke the Gettru case is now a standard operating procedure for cold case units across the globe. This represents a paradigm shift in how we view unsolved crimes. No longer are they dead files. They are simply waiting for a distant relative to take a popular ancestry test. The BN mystery of the 1970s stranglers is being solved one DNA match at a time, turning the vast, anonymous crowd of the past into a searchable database of potential justice. Gettru's arrest was the shock that signaled to every cold case killer still breathing, the world is getting smaller, and your time is running out. As we look back at the trail Gettru left through the hills of Palo Alto, we see more than just a series of crimes. We see a reflection of a society that was forced to grow up. The 1975 cold case didn't just end with a conviction. It ended an era of innocence. It taught us that the terror in the hills isn't a myth or a movie plot. It's a reality that can live among us for decades, hidden in plain sight. The legacy of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor is now intertwined with the very science that brought their killer to justice. They are no longer just victims. They are the catalysts for a new era of accountability. The M-on obsession remains, but it is now tempered by the knowledge that even after 43 years, the law can still reach into the past and pull a monster into the light. The silence of the Stanford foothills is different now. It is no longer a silence of not knowing. It is a silence of closure. But for the investigators who still walk those trails, the question remains, who else is still out there? Whose DNA is sitting in a brown paper bag, waiting for the right moment to speak? The case of John Arthur Gettru is a victory, yes, but it is also a reminder that the map of California's cold cases is still dotted with unsolved markers. The Manhoy is there. The science is there, and the detectives are listening. The long, dark night of the 1970s is finally being illuminated, one star at a time, until the last shadow has nowhere left to hide. The year 1980 arrived with a neon-soaked roar, yet in the quiet, manicured lawns of Hayward and the surrounding Bay Area suburbs, the man who would eventually be known as the Stanford Strangler was settling into a life of chillingly successful mimicry. While the detectives in Palo Alto stared at the yellowing Polaroids of Leslie Perlov's final resting place, John Arthur Gettru was busy building a resume, a family, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. This is the M-on obsession that keeps investigators awake at night, the realization that a predator doesn't always look like a drifter with a hollow stare. Sometimes, the predator looks like the man who helps you jumpstart your car in the grocery store parking lot. Gettru had mastered the art of the social camouflage, a psychological cloak that allowed him to move through the world without triggering a single alarm. He wasn't just hiding from the law, he was hiding in plain sight, utilizing the very community trust he had violated to protect himself from suspicion. Every time a new cold case headline hit the San Jose Mercury News, Gettru likely read it with the detached interest of a man who believed he had outsmarted fate itself. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, that eventually led to his undoing was not a smoking gun or a blood-stained garment found in an attic. It was the biological debris of a life lived in the shadows. To understand the complexity of the 1975 case, one must look at the specific modus operandi that Gettru employed. He didn't just kill, he dominated. The crime scenes at the Stanford foothills and Sand Hill Road were marked by a terrifying level of physical control. Strangulation is a deeply personal, prolonged, and intimate form of violence. It requires the killer to be physically present, to feel the life fading, and to maintain that pressure until the end. This wasn't a crime of distance or a crime of impulse. It was a crime of calculation. The ligatures used, the cords, the clothing, were tied with a precision that suggested someone comfortable with knots, someone who understood how to restrain a human being effectively. This detail, hidden in the 1975 autopsy reports, would later become a critical signature that linked his various crimes across decades and continents. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the cold case file for Leslie Perlov was moved from the active desk to the dead storage. The investigators who had originally walked the trails were retiring, their notebooks filled with interviews of suspects who led nowhere. Meanwhile, Getru was thriving in the digital age. He was a man who understood the value of appearing normal. He held jobs that required trust and responsibility. He was involved in local organizations. He was the Boy Scout leader, a detail that sent a SOC Tsongdong community shock through the region when it was finally revealed. Think about the irony. A man who had strangled 2 young women in their prime was entrusted with the guidance and safety of the community's youth. This wasn't just a failure of the police. It was a failure of our collective ability to recognize the mask of sanity that sociopaths wear so effortlessly. He didn't just escape justice. He mocked it by living the very life he had denied to Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor. The technical Manhoy clue that would eventually break the case was a matter of forensic amplification. In the 1970s, the biological samples collected from the victims were limited by the science of the time. Serology, the study of blood types and body fluids, could only narrow the suspect pool down to a certain percentage of the population. It couldn't provide a name. But those samples were preserved with a foresight that is almost prophetic. The detectives in 1975 might not have known what DNA was, but they knew that something in those fibers, something in those fluids, held the key. They kept the evidence in brown paper bags, the gold standard for preventing the growth of mold and the degradation of biological material. For 43 years, the killer's genetic code was locked in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the world to catch up. When the 2018 cold case unit finally reopened those bags, they weren't just looking for evidence. They were looking for a ghost that had been trapped in a paper tomb. The process of genetic genealogy is often described as a miracle, but it is actually a meticulous, grueling labor of data analysis. It begins with the extraction of a single nucleotide polymorphism, SNP, profile, a map of hundreds of thousands of genetic markers that go far beyond the standard CODIS profile used by the FBI. This map is then uploaded to public databases like GEDmatch, where everyday people have shared their DNA in search of distant cousins or long-lost ancestors. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, in the Getru case wasn't a direct match to Getru himself. He was never in the system. The match was to a distant relative, a person who had no idea that their quest for family history would lead to the doorstep of a cold-blooded killer. The investigators then had to build a reverse family tree, working backward through generations, identifying siblings, cousins, and parents until the tree narrowed down to a single branch. A branch that led directly to a man living in Hayward, California, who had once lived in Palo Alto in 1975. The SOC shock of the discovery was palpable within the sheriff's office. When the name John Arthur Getru first appeared on the screen, it meant nothing to the current team. He wasn't a usual suspect. He wasn't on the top 10 list of Stanford predators. But as they began to dig into his background, the cold case began to heat up with terrifying speed. They found the 1963 German conviction. They found the military records. They found the employment history that placed him at Stanford at the exact time of the murders. The BN mystery wasn't just who he was, but how he had remained invisible for so long. The investigators realized they weren't just looking at a murderer. They were looking at a successful serial killer, one who had the discipline to stop or the luck to never be caught again. The Manhoy was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing man with a social security number and a suburban address. The surveillance of Getru in 2018 was a high-stakes game of forensic waiting. The team couldn't just knock on his door and ask for a DNA sample. They had to obtain it surreptitiously to ensure he didn't flee or destroy evidence. They watched him. They followed him as he went about his mundane errands. They waited for him to discard something, a coffee cup, a napkin, a piece of trash, that would contain his biological signature. This is the modern Manhoy. Clue the debris of our daily lives that we leave behind without a second thought. When they finally secured a discarded item, the lab worked through the night to confirm the match. The DNA from the 1975 Perloff crime scene and the DNA from the 2018 trash was an identical, undeniable match. The cold case was over. The 43-year-old silence had been broken by the scream of a laboratory sequencer. The arrest of John Arthur Getrew was a moment of chandong, shock, that rippled through the true crime community and the legal world. It was a validation of a new era of justice. But for the families, it was the start of a new kind of obsession. They had to confront the reality that the man who had murdered their loved one had been living a full, happy life just a few miles away. He had experienced the weddings, the births, the holidays, and the simple joys of a long life, while their lives had been permanently altered by his violence. This is the stalemate of justice. It can punish the guilty, but it can never truly balance the scales. The Manhoy KY law of DNA provided a name, but it couldn't provide a why. It couldn't explain how a man could live with such a dark secret for so long without the weight of it crushing his soul. The legacy of the Perloff case is now a permanent part of California's criminal history. It serves as a reminder that the Matt Titchbian mysterious disappearance of the past can be solved by the persistent curiosity of the future. The cold case is no longer a dead end. It is a waiting room. Every piece of evidence preserved in an evidence locker is a potential manhoy that could one day lead to an arrest. Getrew's conviction was a warning shot to every other ordinary man with a dark past. It told them that their camouflage is no longer effective. It told them that their relative's DNA is a bridge that leads straight to their door. The SOC Tsongdong has evolved from a fear of the unknown to a confidence in the power of science to uncover the truth, no matter how many decades have passed. As the voiceover continues, we see the image of the Stamford Hills again, but this time, the shadows feel less threatening. They are no longer the hiding places of a nameless strangler. They are the backdrop to a story of endurance, the endurance of the victim's memories, the endurance of the investigator's will, and the endurance of the truth itself. The manhoy that was once a microscopic fragment of fabric is now a beacon of hope for thousands of other unsolved cases. The California 1975 cold case solved is more than just a headline. It is a promise that the past will always be held accountable to the present. The of the unsolved is being replaced by the Jayagon, sensational, reality of justice served, proving that in the end, the light always finds a way to penetrate even the deepest, coldest shadows of the past. The courtroom doors swing open, and the air inside is thick with a tension that has been building for nearly half a century. It is here, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit arena of the San Mateo County Superior Court, that the ghosts of the 1970s are finally summoned to speak. The trial of John Arthur Getrew is not just a legal proceeding, it is a collision of two distinct eras. On one side, the chaotic, analog world of 1974 and 1975, a time of handwritten police reports, blurry black and white crime scene photos, and evidence collected by detectives who could never have imagined the concept of a double helix. On the other side, the precise, digital certainty of the 21st century, armed with probability statistics that run into the quintillions. The stalemate, that had paralyzed the investigation for decades is about to be broken by a battle between memory and mathematics. The defense strategy is predictable but potent. Attack the timeline. They argue that the manhoy clue is too old, too degraded. They paint a picture of a 1970s evidence room as a chaotic, contaminated place where samples could have been mixed, where a stray hair or a fleck of skin could have been transferred by a careless technician. They challenge the chain of custody, the paper trail that documents who held the evidence and when. It is a legal desperate measure, an attempt to sow doubt in the minds of a jury that lives in an age of CSI-style certainty. They ask the jury to look at the frail, elderly man in the wheelchair, the grandfather, the neighbor, the churchgoer, and ask if this looks like a monster. It is a psychological gambit, relying on the visual cognitive dissonance of seeing a benign senior citizen accused of savage, youthful violence. But the prosecution has a weapon that cuts through the fog of nostalgia, the unyielding, binary truth of DNA. The expert witnesses take the stand, not with dramatic flourishes, but with cold, hard numbers. They explain to the jury that the genetic material found under Leslie Perlov's fingernails and on Janet Taylor's clothing is not just a match. It is a unique biological signature that belongs to one man and one man only. They dismantle the contamination theory with the precision of a surgeon. They explain that the specific location of the DNA, intimately mixed with the victim's own biological markers, could not have been the result of a casual transfer in a storage locker. It was placed there during a struggle. It was placed there during the final, terrifying moments of life. The SOC, shock, in the courtroom is visceral as the science translates the abstract concept of strangulation into a biological reality. The DNA is the silent witness that has refused to age, refused to forget, and refused to be intimidated by the passage of time. As the trial unfolds, the aftermath of the 1970s spills out in the testimony of the witnesses who are still alive to speak. Friends of Leslie and Janet, now in their 60s and 70s, take the stand. Their voices trembling not just with age, but with a grief that has been frozen in amber. They describe the fear in the hills that gripped the community. They describe the empty chairs at graduation ceremonies, the orange Nova left abandoned on the road, the hitchhiking culture that turned from a symbol of freedom into a symbol of danger. This testimony does something the DNA cannot. It humanizes the tragedy. It reminds the jury that this cold case isn't about biology. It's about stolen potential. It's about the books that were never written, the children never born, the lives never lived. The courtroom becomes a time machine, transporting everyone back to a California that was losing its innocence one murder at a time. When the verdict is finally read, guilty, it lands with the weight of a gavel striking a tombstone. There are no cheers, no high fives. The reaction is a solemn, heavy silence. The Chandong, shock, has passed, replaced by a grim satisfaction. John Arthur Getrew, the man who thought he had outrun his shadow, is convicted of murder. The legal system, often criticized for its slowness, has proven that it has a memory as long as the crime itself. But the conviction brings with it a new, unsettling question, one that hangs in the air as the deputies will Getrew out of the courtroom. What about the others? This is the obsession that begins to take root the moment the trial ends. A predator like Getrew, who killed with such ferocity and frequency in the mid-1970s, does not typically just turn off his impulses. The cooling-off period in serial killer psychology is real, but a total cessation of violence for 40 years is a statistical anomaly. Did he truly stop? Or did he just get better at it? The timeline of his life in Hayward and the broader Bay Area is now being scrutinized with a magnifying glass. Every camping trip, every business trip, every period where his wife and daughter were away, these are now windows of opportunity that investigators are desperate to fill. The BTAC of the known cases has been solved, but the mystery of the unknown potential victims has just begun. The cold case unit is now engaged in a grim process of backtesting. They are pulling files from the 1980s and 1990s, cases of missing women, unidentified remains found in remote ravines, unsolved sexual assaults where the victim survived but the attacker was never caught. They are running Getrew's DNA against every Jane Doe case in Northern California. The fear is that Getrew's mask of sanity was even more effective than anyone realized. Did he use his position as a nice guy to lure victims in ways that didn't leave a chaotic crime scene? Did he change his modus operandi to avoid detection? The possibility that there are other Leslie Perlovs buried in the files, classified as runaways or accidents, is a nightmare scenario that keeps the detectives working long after the media vans have left the courthouse. The California 1975 cold case has thus evolved from a murder mystery into a forensic audit of a man's entire existence. The Manhoy is no longer just about catching a killer, it's about mapping the full extent of a human catastrophe. The community, once relieved by the arrest, is now in a state of watchful anxiety. People are looking at their own family photo albums, checking the dates, wondering if they ever crossed paths with the man in the orange Nova, the man in the hills, the man who smiled and waved while harboring a darkness that defied comprehension. The story of John Arthur Gettru is a testament to the Jayagon sensational power of truth, but it is also a warning about the limitations of justice. We can lock up the man, but we cannot unlock the past. We cannot undo the fear that permeated the Stanford campus for a decade. We cannot give the Perlov and Taylor families back the years they spent in the wilderness of not knowing. The SOC Songdong resonates because it exposes the fragility of our safety. It shows us that the line between a sunny afternoon in the foothills and a descent into darkness is razor thin, and that sometimes the only thing standing between a victim and a predator is a piece of luck that ran out in 1975. As the camera pans away from the courthouse and back to the rolling golden hills of the peninsula, the wind whispers through the dry grass. The trails are busy again. Joggers, students, and families enjoy the beauty of the landscape. But beneath the surface, the memory of the Orange Nova remains. It is a scar on the land, a reminder that beauty and terror can occupy the same space. The case is closed, but the do-em echoes on. The investigation into the darkness of John Arthur Gettru is a deep, dark well, and we may have only just skimmed the surface of the water. The conviction of John Arthur Gettru settled the dust on 2 specific files, but it did not clear the fog that hangs over the 1970s. As the prison doors clanged shut, a terrifying realization began to dawn on the investigators and the amateur sleuths who had obsessed over the Stanford murders for decades. For years, the prevailing theory was that a single superpredator, a zodiac of the foothills, was responsible for the string of bodies found near the university. The narrative was clean, simple, and horrifying. One monster, one hunting ground. But the truth, as revealed by the Gettru verdict and other recent breakthroughs, is far more disturbing. The SOC Songdong community shock isn't that there was a serial killer in Palo Alto, it is that there was more than one. The hills weren't being stalked by a lone wolf. They were a feeding ground for a pack of unconnected, independent predators operating in the same square mileage, at the same time, shielded by the same chaotic cultural blind spots.
Consider the timeline.
In October 1974, Arliss Perry was brutally murdered inside the Stanford Memorial Church, a case that became a national sensation of occult panic and mystery. For 44 years, the public psyche linked Perry's death with the disappearances of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor. They were all young, all connected to the university area, all victims of extreme violence. It was assumed that the Stanford Strangler was one man. But in 2018, just months before Gettru was identified, the Perry case was solved via DNA. The killer wasn't Gettru. It was Stephen Crawford, the security guard who had found the body. 2 different men. 2 distinct psychologies. Operating in the same year, in the same zip code, hunting the same demographic. This is the Chandong shock that rewrites history. A young woman walking the Stanford campus in 1974 wasn't just dodging one bullet, she was walking through a crossfire of predatory intent. This realization forces a complete reassessment of the cold case landscape of Northern California. If Gettru and Crawford were operating simultaneously without knowing each other, who else was there? The Manhoy, Clue, trails that were previously dismissed because they didn't fit the Gettru profile or the Crawford profile must now be dusted off. The investigation shifts from a linear pursuit of one man to a matrix investigation of a geographical anomaly. Why was this specific era, a magnet for such darkness? Was it the transient nature of the student population? The dense, unpoliced cover of the foothills? Or was it the perfect storm of the 70s, a time when the forensic technology was medieval compared to the boldness of the killers? The BTAC, stalemate, of the past wasn't just about bad policing, it was about an overwhelming volume of separate, overlapping evils. With Gettru behind bars, the focus of the cold case, unit has pivoted to the silent victims, the women who encountered him and survived, and the women whose bodies have never been identified. The Gettru timeline is now being overlaid with the Jane Doe map of California. Between 1975 and 2018, Dozens of unidentified female remains were found in the remote ravines of the Santa Cruz Mountains and the wider Bay Area. Many were dismissed as runaways or victims of drug overdoses, their cases filed away with minimal investigation. But now, every Jane Doe found near a camping ground, a hiking trail, or a location connected to Getru's employment history is a potential lead. The Manhoy KY law is no longer just DNA, it is geography. Investigators are using advanced mapping software to pinpoint where Getru lived, where he vacationed, and where he worked, creating a heat map of potential violence that stretches from the Bay Area to the Central Valley. The psychological toll of this expanded hunt is heavy. For the women who attended Stanford or lived in Palo Alto during that era, the news is a retroactive trauma. The SOC comes in the form of memories replayed with a new, sinister filter. The man who offered a ride in his orange Nova. The jogger who seemed to be following a bit too closely. The friendly face at the local hangouts. How many near misses occurred? How many times did Getru stalk a target only to turn away because a car passed by or a dog barked? The community is grappling with the survivor's guilt of a generation. They are realizing that their survival was not a matter of skill or caution, but a matter of chance, a coin flip in a decade where the odds were rigged against them. The am-on obsession is no longer just about the dead, it is about the fragility of the living. Furthermore, the Getru conviction has accelerated the Doe Project initiatives in California. The same genetic genealogy that identified him is now being used to give names to the nameless. This is the other side of the coin. If we can use DNA to find a killer, we can use it to find a victim. The Manhoy works both ways. In labs across the state, bone fragments and teeth from cold case remains are being pulverized, their DNA extracted, and uploaded to the same databases that caught Getru. The goal is to close the loop. If investigators can identify a Jane Doe from 1978 and link her social circle to Getru's known haunts, the case transforms from a suspicious death to a homicide prosecution. The silence of the evidence room is being replaced by the hum of sequencers, each one trying to speak for those who cannot. There is also a legal ripple effect that cannot be ignored. The defense teams for other accused killers are watching the Getru postgame closely. The contamination, arguments failed in the Perloff case, but they will be refined. The legal battleground is shifting to the privacy of genetic data. The Manhoy KY law of using distant relatives to catch a suspect raises profound civil liberty questions that will be litigated for years. But for the detectives on the ground, these are abstract concerns. Their reality is the box. The cardboard box that sits on a metal shelf, labeled unsolved. The Getru case proved that the box is not a coffin, it is a time capsule. It proved that justice doesn't have an expiration date, provided that the physical evidence, the biological anchor, has been preserved. The narrative of the California 1975 cold case is also a story about the evolution of the victim profile. In the 70s, there was a tendency to blame the victim, to suggest that hitchhiking, walking alone, or being out after dark was a form of consent to danger. The police reports of the era often contain coded language that minimizes the killer's culpability. But the Getru verdict shattered that framework. Leslie Perlov was just parking her car to take a walk. Janet Taylor was trying to get home. They were not engaging in risky behavior. They were living their lives. The SOC of the trial was the clarity it brought to the victimology. These were crimes of opportunity committed by a predator who required nothing from his victims other than their presence. The cold case investigation reclaimed their dignity. It stripped away the moral judgments of the 1970s and replaced them with the moral clarity of the 2020s. The only person responsible for a murder is the murderer. As the aftermath settles, a new silence descends on the foothills, not the terrified silence of 1975, but the vigilant silence of a community that knows the truth. The orange Nova is gone, crushed into a cube of scrap metal decades ago. The wolf of the hills is caged. But the lesson remains etched into the landscape. The trails where Leslie walked are still there, winding through the golden grass. The oak trees that witnessed the crime still stand, their roots deep in the soil that held the secret for 43 years. The case serves as a permanent warning beacon to the future. Do not assume that time erases sin. Do not assume that a cold case is forgotten. Somewhere in a quiet lab, a machine is running. A scientist is looking at a screen. And a manhoi is about to turn red, signaling that another ghost is ready to point a finger at the living. The mystery of John Arthur Gettru is solved, but the mystery of human evil remains. How does a man compartmentalize to this extent? How does he switch from strangler to father? This is the question that lingers in the minds of the jurors, the families, and the detectives. It is the betrayal of the human soul, a dark corner that no DNA test can illuminate. We have mapped the genome, but we have not mapped the darkness that resides in the heart of a man who can smile at his neighbors while remembering the feeling of a ligature in his hands. The California 1975 cold case is a triumph of science, but a tragedy of psychology. It is a story that ends not with a period, but with an ellipsis. A pause that invites us to look closer at the world around us and to wonder what other secrets are hiding behind the friendly faces of the everyday. And yet, amidst the darkness, there is a Tia Hai Vong, ray of hope. The resolution of this case has empowered a new generation of investigators. It has validated the tireless work of the cold case advocates, the retired cops who wouldn't let go, the bloggers who kept the names alive, the siblings who called the precinct every year on the anniversary. It proved that their persistence mattered. It proved that the echo of a scream in 1975 can still be heard in 2018 if you have the right tools to listen. The hills are no longer just a place of death. They are a place where the truth, against all odds, clawed its way back to the surface. The conviction of John Arthur Gettru did more than just solve 2 murders. It shattered the comforting myth of the singular monster. For decades, the public imagination had stitched the tragedies of the Stanford foothills into a single, cohesive narrative alone. Stanford strangler, haunting the campus, a solitary wolf in the fold. But the truth, as revealed by the cold case unit's relentless grind, was far more terrifying. The hills were not the domain of one man. They were a shared hunting ground. In October 1974, while Gettru was prowling the perimeter of the university, another man, Stephen Crawford, a security guard entrusted with the safety of the campus, was carving his own path of destruction inside the sacred walls of the Memorial Church. The realization that 2 independent, lethal predators were operating in the same square mile during the same year, targeting the same demographic, sent a Chandong shock through the investigative community that is still being felt today. It was a statistical anomaly that defied belief, a perfect storm of malevolence where a young woman hitchhiking on Sandhill Road or praying in a pew was walking through a crossfire of unconnected evils. The BTAC, stalemate, of the 70s wasn't just a failure of technology, it was a failure to comprehend the sheer density of the darkness. The police were looking for a needle in a haystack, never suspecting that the haystack was full of needles. The Gettru verdict and the Crawford suicide, he took his own life as police closed in, marked the end of the Stanford murders as a monolith and the beginning of a new, fragmented understanding of the era. With the known monsters now accounted for, the focus of the investigation has shifted to the silent majority of the cold case files, the Jane Does. These are the victims who lost not only their lives but their names. In the Santa Cruz Mountains and the ravines of Santa Clara County, there are still graves marked only by case numbers and approximate ages. The Manhua KY law, strange clue, for these cases is no longer a suspect's name, but the victim's identity. The same genetic genealogy that trapped Gettru is now being reverse-engineered to give these women back their histories. The Doe Project and local cold case units are currently pulverizing bone fragments from the 70s and 80s, engaging in a forensic resurrection that aims to link the nameless dead to the missing persons reports of half a century ago. The urgency of this work is driven by the Gettru gap. From 1975 until his arrest in 2018, John Arthur Gettru lived as a free man. He traveled. He camped. He moved through the world with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Investigators are now obsessed with this 43-year void. did a serial sexual sadist who began killing at 18 in Germany and continued in his 20s in California simply turn off his impulses? Or are there other victims buried in other jurisdictions who have never been linked to him because he changed his methods? The obsession of the current investigation is the possibility of a hidden map, a trail of violence that tracks with Gertrude's family vacations, his job transfers, his quiet weekends away. The cold case unit is now engaged in a massive data mining operation, overlaying Gertrude's life timeline with the locations of every unsolved strangulation and sexual assault in the western United States. They're looking at the outliers, the cases that didn't fit the pattern of the time, the bodies found in counties where Gertrude wasn't a resident but merely a visitor. This is the aftermath of the conviction, the realization that the map of his crimes might be much larger than 2 red pins in Palo Alto. The Manhoy is being sought in the dusty archives of rural sheriff's departments, in the fading memories of old hiking partners, and in the storage lockers of evidence that hasn't seen the light of day since the Ford administration. One specific area of intense scrutiny is the hitchhiker murders phenomenon of the early 70s. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, a series of unsolved killings north of the Bay Area, have long been the subject of speculation. While there is currently no direct DNA linked to Gertrude, his profile, a mobile, sexually motivated predator operating in Northern California during the exact time frame, forces detectives to ask the hard questions. Was he just a Stanford killer, or was he a California killer? The B-tack of these other cases is suddenly permeable. Every time a new DNA profile is uploaded to the national database, the potential for a link flickers to life. The SOC Tsong-dong has evolved into a grim expectation. The public is no longer surprised by the evil of the past, only by the duration of its concealment. The atmosphere in the labs where this work happens is one of quiet, clinical reverence. The technicians handling the Jane Doe samples know they are the last line of defense against total oblivion. When they extract DNA from a molar or a femur, they are not just processing evidence, they are performing an act of memory. They are trying to undo the killer's final act of erasure. The Manhoy KY law. Here is the biological tenacity of the human body, the fact that a person's identity is written into every cell, waiting for the future to learn how to read it. The Gertrude case proved that the reading is possible. Now, the question is whether the budget, the time, and the will of the system can keep pace with the science. As the narrative moves away from the specific legal battles of Gertrude and Crawford, it enters a murkier, more philosophical territory. We are forced to confront the banality of their evil. These were not masterminds. They were opportunists who exploited a specific cultural moment, a moment of transition when society was open enough to hitchhike, but not cynical enough to suspect the man in the orange Nova or the uniform. The California 1975 cold case is a tombstone for that era. It marks the death of the open road and the birth of the locked door. The on that remains is the knowledge that we are the children of that loss, living in a world designed to protect us from the very monsters who once walked among us unnoticed. The cold in cold case is thawing. The ice is melting, and the waters are rising, bringing with them the debris of the past. For the families of the Jane Does, the Gertrude verdict offers a Tia Hai Vong, ray of hope that is both blinding and painful. If Leslie Perlov's killer can be found after 43 years, then perhaps their daughter, their sister, their mother is not lost forever. Perhaps she is just waiting in a database, a string of numbers looking for a match. The story is no longer about who killed them. It is about who were they. And as the investigators dig deeper into the Gertrude gap, they are prepared to find that the man in the wheelchair was not just a killer of 2, but a ghost who haunted the entire state. The conviction of John Arthur Gertrude was a legal termination, but for the families of the victims, it was the beginning of a complex, emotional thawing. To understand the true weight of this case, you have to look into the eyes of Diane Perlov. For 43 years, she was the keeper of the flame, the sister who refused to let Leslie become just another file number in a dusty basement. She lived through the decades of silence, the false leads, and the agonizing stalemate, where hope seemed like a cruel joke. When the news finally broke, when the Manhoy KY Law, strange clue, of DNA finally spoke the name of the killer, it wasn't a moment of cinematic jubilation. It was a moment of collapsing weight. It was the physical sensation of a burden being lifted, a burden she had carried for so long it had become part of her skeleton. The courtroom became a theater of vindication, but also of profound sorrow. Listening to the details of Leslie's final fight, her resistance, her strength, brought a new layer of obsession to the surface. Leslie wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter who had been overpowered by a predator hiding behind a mask of normalcy. The SOC Tsongdong community shock that rippled through the gallery wasn't just about the brutality of the crime. It was about the proximity of the killer. Diane had to reconcile the fact that while she was mourning, Getru was living. He was building model airplanes, attending parent-teacher conferences, and aging gracefully in the California sun. This disparity, the stolen time of the victim versus the stolen time of the killer, is the jagged pill that the justice system can never fully sweeten. But the impact of the case extends far beyond the Perlov and Taylor families. It struck a nerve in the collective memory of the entire Bay Area. The Stanford murders were a generational trauma, a dark cloud that had hovered over the Golden Hills for half a century. Women who were students in the 70s, now grandmothers themselves, found themselves revisiting their own memories with a new, terrifying clarity. The hitchhiking trips they took, the times they walked alone at night, the friendly men they encountered, suddenly, the margins of error in their own lives felt razor-thin. The Getru verdict validated their lifelong fears. It proved that the boogeyman wasn't a myth. He was a lab technician, a security guard, a neighbor. The aftermath is a collective survivor's guilt, a realization that they were the lucky ones who walked out of the 70s alive. This psychological awakening has triggered a new wave of tips and reopenings. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, a series of unsolved killings that terrorized the North Bay in the early 70s, are now being viewed through the lens of the Getru revelation. 7 young women, stripped and strangled, their bodies dumped in rural ravines. For decades, theories ranged from the Zodiac Killer to Ted Bundy. But now, investigators are asking, could it have been Getru? Could it have been someone like Getru, a local predator operating under the radar? The Manhoy profiles are being re-examined. The geographical heat maps of Getru's movements are being overlaid with the locations of these bodies. The BTAC of the Santa Rosa cases is no longer absolute. It is porous. The Getru conviction has taught detectives that unsolved does not mean unsolvable. It just means waiting for the right science. The transition in law enforcement methodology is palpable. The California 1975 cold case has become a case study in the shift from reactive to proactive forensics. In the past, cold cases were often treated as dormant volcanoes, dangerous but asleep. Now, they're being treated as active crime scenes that are simply paused in time. Departments are no longer waiting for a new witness to come forward. They are actively mining their evidence lockers for biological gold. The DOE Project and other genetic genealogy initiatives are industrializing the process of identification. They are not just solving crimes, they are restoring humanity. Every Jane Doe identified is a victory against the killer's ultimate goal, total erasure. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the legacy of John Arthur Getru is ironically one of progress. His crimes were the product of an analog world where a predator could disappear into the cracks. His capture is the product of a digital world where those cracks have been sealed. The SOC of his arrest has emboldened a new generation of forensic genealogists who view themselves as data detectives. They are the ones scanning the databases, building the family trees, and connecting the dots that lead from a 19th century ancestor to a 20th century killer. The Manhoy has evolved from a physical object to a digital thread, one that can be pulled from anywhere in the world. Yet, amidst the scientific triumph, the human element remains the most potent. The do-em of the case is a reminder that justice is a form of love. It is the refusal to forget. It is the stubborn insistence that Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor matter, not because of how they died, but because of who they were. The cold case label is a misnomer. For the families, the case was never cold. It was burning hot every single day for 43 years. The Getru conviction didn't put out the fire, it just allowed the smoke to finally clear. The hills of Palo Alto are quiet now. The terror has receded into history books and podcasts. But for those who know where to look, the landscape is still marked by the invisible scars of 1975. The BN mystery of the era has been pierced by the light of truth, but the shadows it cast are long. As we look to the future, we must ask, what is the next frontier? If we can solve the crimes of the 70s, what about the 80s? What about the 90s? The technology that caught Getru is getting faster, cheaper, and more precise. The hunting ground is closing. The mask of sanity is slipping. And somewhere in another suburb, another quiet neighbor is watching the news, wondering if his own biological clock is ticking down to a knock on the door. The conviction of John Arthur Getru stands as a monolith in the landscape of criminal justice, a towering testament to the fact that the past is no longer a sanctuary. But as the dust settles on the files of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor, a new, sharper reality begins to emerge from the fog of the San Francisco Peninsula. We are witnessing the death of the perfect crime. In 1975, a predator could rely on the silence of the hills, the darkness of the night, and the chaotic fragmentation of police records to cloak their deeds. They could rely on the BTAC, stalemate, of an analog world where information traveled at the speed of a typewriter. Today, that world has been incinerated by the white-hot light of the digital age. The capture of Getru wasn't just a win for the past, it was a warning shot for the future. We are entering an era where anonymity is a myth, and where the biological debris of a crime scene acts as a homing beacon that never stops transmitting. The Manhoy KY law, strange clue, that unraveled the Stanford murders, the preservation of DNA, is now evolving into something far more potent. We are moving beyond simple matching. We are entering the realm of forensic phenotyping, where a speck of blood left on a hiking trail can be used to generate a 3D composite of the killer's face, eye color, and ancestry before a suspect is even identified. If John Getru had committed his crimes today, there would be no 43-year wait. There would be no cold case. The SOC Tsongdong, community shock, would not be the lingering fear of an unknown monster, but the swift, terrifying efficiency of a system that can name a predator within days. The Orange Nova would have been captured on a dozen dashcams, the license plate read by automated readers, the movement of the killer's phone tracked through the triangulation of cell towers. The mystery that defined the 1970s is becoming an endangered species. However, this technological omnipotence brings with it a new kind of obsession. As investigators comb through the backlog of California's cold cases, they are realizing that the Getru profile, the socially integrated, successful, quiet killer, is likely more common than we dared to imagine. The Golden State Killer was a cop. John Arthur Getru was a Boy Scout leader. The man who killed Arliss Perry was a security guard. The mask of sanity is not a rare disguise. It is the standard uniform of the modern predator. The future of cold cases is therefore a psychological siege. It is about identifying the sleepers who are still among us, the men who watched the Getru trial on television and felt the cold hand of panic grip their chests. They know that their own Manhoy, a cigarette but dropped in 1982, a hair left on a car seat in 1994, is sitting in an evidence locker, ticking like a time bomb. The transformation of the cold case unit itself is a critical part of this narrative. It has morphed from a repository of dead files into a high-tech intelligence agency. In Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, the detectives are no longer just looking for witnesses. They are data miners. They are feeding decades of police reports into predictive algorithms that can spot patterns a human eye would miss. They are linking the modus operandi of the Stanford murders to similar unsolved crimes in Oregon, in Nevada, in Europe. The BTAC of jurisdictional boundaries is dissolving. The Getru case proved that a killer doesn't stop at the county line, and neither should the investigation. The SOC for the criminal element is that the map is now global. A crime committed in Germany in 1963 can and will be used to hang you in California in 2018. The statute of limitations may run out on some crimes, but it never runs out on the truth. But amidst this digital revolution, the emotional core of the story remains painfully human. The technology can find the who, but it cannot explain the why. It cannot explain how a man like Gertrude could extinguish the bright, vibrant light of Leslie Perlov and then go home to eat dinner with his family. It cannot explain the void that his actions left in the world. The aftermath of the case is a reminder that while we can solve the puzzle, we can never fix the picture. The pieces are back in place, but the cracks remain. The survivors, the siblings, the friends, the community, are left to navigate a world where the monster has been caught, but the fear he planted has taken deep root. The hills are safe again, but they are haunted by the knowledge of what happened there. The innocence of the 1970s is gone, replaced by a vigilant, weary wisdom. This new wisdom suggests that the end of the serial killer era is not about the extinction of evil, but about the acceleration of justice. The California 1975 cold case serves as the blueprint for this new reality. It demonstrates that the most powerful weapon against darkness is not a gun or a badge, but memory. It is the refusal to let a file gather dust. It is the stubborn, relentless belief that Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor deserve an answer, no matter how long it takes. The manhoy that was once a whisper is now a shout. The cold case is heating up, and the fire is being fueled by the very science that was supposed to be impossible 40 years ago. As we stand on the precipice of this new era, the Chandong, shock, shifts from the horror of the crime to the awe of the resolution. We are realizing that we have the power to reach back into the past and right the wrongs that were thought to be permanent. We are realizing that the ghosts of the 1970s are not resting, they are waiting. They are waiting for us to find the key that unlocks their silence. And as the Gertrude case proves, we finally have the key. The door to the past is open. The BTAC is broken. And for the predators who thought they had escaped into the shadows of history, the light is coming. It is bright, it is blinding, and it is inevitable. The cold case of 1975 is no longer just a story about a murder. It is a story about the endurance of truth. It is a signal to every victim that they are not forgotten. It is a warning to every killer that they are not safe. The Orange Nova may be gone, but the road it traveled is now illuminated by the relentless glare of forensic science. The journey is not over. There are more names to find, more families to heal, more shadows to clear. The Gertrude chapter is closed, but the book of justice is still being written, one DNA match at a time. The silence of the hills has been broken, and in its place, a new voice is speaking, the voice of the dead, finally and loudly, demanding to be heard. The investigation into the darkness of John Arthur Gertrude concludes not with a gavel, but with a final, quiet departure. In September 2023, behind the reinforced walls of the California Health Care Facility in Stockton, the man who had terrorized the Stanford foothills took his last breath. He was 79 years old. There were no headlines of fresh horror, no new victims, no more secrets whispered to a cellmate. There was just the cessation of a biological function that had outlived its right to exist by nearly half a century. The death of John Gertrude marks the absolute, physical end of the Stanford Strangler era. The boogeyman is no longer waiting for parole. He is gone. And for the first time in 50 years, the sun that rises over the Santa Cruz Mountains shines on a world where he no longer casts a shadow. But the true ending of the story does not belong to the killer. It belongs to the women whose lives he stole, and to the women who fought to reclaim their names. Leslie Perlov was not just a cold case file or a victim profile. She was a brilliant mind, a young woman who raced through high school and college in 3 years, a scholar with a scholarship to Stanford, and a future that dazzled with potential. She was a law librarian who spent her days surrounded by the order of books and the promise of justice, ironic, tragic, and beautiful. The orange Chevrolet Nova that sat abandoned on the side of the road wasn't just a crime scene. It was the vessel of her independence, a symbol of a life that was moving forward until it was brutally interrupted. And Janet Taylor. She was not merely a body found on Sand Hill Road. She was the spunky, youngest daughter of a Stanford legend, a girl who loved animals and brought laughter into rooms that are now silent. She was 21, the same age as Leslie, standing on the same precipice of adulthood, looking out at a world she was ready to conquer. When we remember this case, we must strip away the clinical language of ligatures and DNA markers and remember the human vibration of these women. We must remember the books they never read, the careers they never built, and the families they never started. Their legacy is not the manner of their death, but the endurance of their memory. This endurance is personified in Diane Perlov. For 43 years, she was the keeper of the flame, the sister who refused to let the silence of the police files become the silence of the grave. She attended every hearing, sat in every courtroom, and stared into the eyes of the man who destroyed her family, demanding that he see her. Her presence was a testament to the fact that love is a force far more persistent than hate. While Gertrude spent his life hiding, Diane spent hers seeking. In the end, her love outlasted his cruelty. The legacy of the California 1975 cold case is written in her resilience. It teaches us that a victim is not passive. A victim's family is a relentless engine of justice that can keep a case alive long after the detectives have retired and the world has moved on. The resolution of these murders also marks a profound shift in the psychological landscape of the community. For decades, the Stanford murders were a scar on the psyche of the Bay Area, a reminder that even in the most privileged, intellectual, and beautiful corners of the world, darkness could strike without warning. The loss of innocence that began in the 1970s has now settled into a hard-won wisdom. The campus is different today. The open road culture of hitchhiking is gone, replaced by blue emergency phones and security escorts. But the fear is different too. It is no longer the paralyzing fear of the unknown. It is a managed awareness. The capture of Gertrude proved that the monsters are not supernatural phantoms. They are mortal men with names, addresses, and DNA that will eventually betray them. As we look to the future, the California 1975 cold case stands as a lighthouse. It signals the end of the golden age of serial murder. The technology that solved this case, genetic genealogy, is not a fluke. It is the new standard. The Manhoy clue is no longer something a killer can wipe away with bleach or burn in a fireplace. It is written in the very fabric of their being. To every predator who thinks they have gotten away with it, to every killer currently living a quiet life in a suburb, believing their secrets are buried in the past, look at John Arthur Gertrude. Look at how the science reached back through 4 decades of silence to pull him from his home. There is no expiration date on the truth. The clock is ticking, not forward, but backward, unraveling the years until it stops at the exact moment of your crime. The final image of this story is not one of a prison cell, but of the hills themselves. Go back to where it started. The Stanford Dish Trail winds through the golden grass. The oak trees cast long, skeletal shadows in the late afternoon light, and the wind whispers through the canyons. For years, this wind seemed to carry a scream. But today, the air is clear. The orange nova is a memory. The fear has evaporated. The hills have reclaimed their peace. Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor are gone, but they are no longer lost. They have been found. Their names have been spoken in a court of law, and their killer has answered for his sins. The BTAC is broken. And as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the California sky in shades of violet and gold, we are left with a single, resounding truth. Justice may be delayed, it may be obstructed, and it may take a lifetime. But it is coming. The silence is over.